Have you ever seen a pink tank? Usually this color on military vehicles is associated with protests, art performances, or even pride events. But unexpectedly, Russia has entered this peculiar list, and this tank is unique not only because of its color. What's driving Russia to pull such relics out of storage, and how are they being used? Let's figure it out. Meet the Object 279, a Soviet oddity. For decades, this tank sat as an exhibit in a Russian museum. However, the massive losses in armored vehicles during the war in Ukraine have forced the Russians to decommission all kinds of old equipment and send it to the front. This might be the fate awaiting this relic of Soviet tank engineering. The Object 279 was created as a single prototype nearly 70 years ago. Its peculiar design features an unusual hull shape and 4 tracks intended to ensure superior off-road mobility for a tank weighing about as much as an Abrams. It was designed not just for conventional warfare, but to operate in the aftermath of nuclear explosions. In theory, it was supposed to be combat-ready in such extreme conditions. The Object 279 was meant to revolutionize Soviet tank design. Instead, its complex construction limited it to breaking museum doors rather than battlefield lines. Agree? Then hit that like button. The museum in Kubinka near Moscow, often called the Russian Tank Vatican, has housed this relic for decades. Once a testing ground for experimental armor, it's now one of the world's largest tank museums. And yet, some Russian military official decided to pull this monstrosity out, paint it pink, and film it. In the end, the Object 279 didn't go anywhere. Why it was decommissioned remains a mystery. Unlike this mystery tank, the reason behind unearthing this relic is crystal clear. When we arranged to film, the commander told us he had a Leopard. Naturally, we assumed it was one of the Leopards supplied by our Western partners. Instead, it turned out to be this T-62, captured by Ukrainian tankers during the Kherson counteroffensive. The T-62 was one of the first tanks Russia threw into battle when its newer equipment ran out. Calling it old is an understatement. The T-62 is an echo of the Second World War, a relic. Sure, they're trying to modernize it a bit, adding some newer equipment, but finding someone who even knows how to operate something this ancient is a challenge. For its time, the T-62 was revolutionary, featuring a smoothbore 115mm gun. They handed me a T-62 shell to hold. It's heavy. I can't imagine what the loader has to go through to handle and load this thing. The T-62 proved itself in 20th century conflicts, but today, it belongs in retirement. Instead, Russia has sent hundreds of these relics to fight in Ukraine. Primarily used for static fire from dugouts, the T-62 occasionally finds itself in peculiar situations. When we first saw it, we didn't even recognize it as a tank. It looked like a shed on tracks. We climbed inside and realized it was an old T-62 welded all over with scrap metal. We circled the tank and no one was coming out. Finally, someone tried to surrender, stepping out with their hands up. Turned out, it was the tank's crew. This tank shed has become a meme. Want to know more about it and other trophies captured from the Russians? Check out this video. But as outdated as these vehicles may seem, they still perform their primary function. They shoot. And the laughs end when those museum exhibits start firing shells at your position. Underestimating this tank is a mistake. We're prepared for it, and we analyze its capabilities. It can harm personnel and damage our equipment. We must take it seriously. The best people to laugh at tanks are those who've personally destroyed them. If anyone wants to laugh harder, recruitment centers are open. Join the Ukrainian Armed Forces, sign a contract, and we'll laugh together. But sometimes you can't help but laugh. In 2021 in Volgograd, locals stumbled across something truly bizarre at an abandoned airport amidst piles of trash. A state-of-the-art Russian T-90 tank. T-90 ProRiv, the best tank in the world. How long it had been sitting there is unknown, but the tracks, half buried in the ground, suggest it wasn't just a few days. Surprisingly, local scrap metal scavengers hadn't managed to strip it for parts. Tools and small spare parts were still in open crates nearby, along with tow cables and canvas covers. Even the expensive optics for the sights and viewports were still intact. When asked, the press service of Russia's southern military district explained that the tank had participated in training exercises for the Army 2021 forum. Perhaps someone back then already foresaw the fate awaiting these tanks in Ukraine and thoughtfully left this state-of-the-art T-90 where it belongs, in the trash. If this gave you a good laugh, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's shift from one of Russia's newest tanks to one of its oldest. While this relic hasn't yet been spotted on the front lines, it's become a staple of Russian propaganda. And as always, they've gone overboard. In 2019, Russia purchased 30 T-34-85 tanks from Laos, originally intended for parades on Red Square. But in true Russian fashion, they took things to the next level, creating an entire battalion of these parade tanks within the 4th Kantemirovskaya Tank Division. The Russian Ministry of Defense even held a competitive selection process for contractors to serve in this battalion, with 13 applicants per spot. To secure a place, candidates had to demonstrate in-depth knowledge of the T-34-85's specifications, maintenance, and operational history. Here's an odd twist. The Laotian T-34s weren't even Soviet-made. They were produced in Czechoslovakia in the 1950s. A strange irony, considering the T-34 is the ultimate fetish for Soviet nostalgia enthusiasts. Yet, Russia had to import them from abroad. Why? Because they scrapped their own T-34s for metal after retiring them in 1994. Even with all these purchases, Russia's biggest celebration in 2023 had just one tank. Not one model, just one tank. This is the only tank that rolled through Red Square today. No T-72B3, no T-80 BVM, no T-90 ProRiv, no Armata. Where are they? These machines serve a purely propaganda purpose for Russia, so it wouldn't be surprising to see them near the front lines soon, attempting to boost morale by recreating scenes from their beloved World War II movies. Speaking of movies, imagine Universal Studios supplying the US military with props from their films, say an AT-AT from Star Wars. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, Russia's largest film studio actually did just that. In 2023, we handed over 28 T-55 tanks, 8 PT-76 amphibious tanks, 6 BMPs, and 8 tractors from our military tech storage to the armed forces. I heard they needed them, and the Ministry of Defense took them. We're proud of Mosfilm. Thank you. These are essentially props from the 1950s and 60s, now being sent to the world's second best army. The PT-76, for example, dates back to the Vietnam War era and was last used by the Russian army during the First Chechen War. What Russia plans to do with these relics is anyone's guess. Some of these tanks were modified for film shoots to look like World War II German tanks. Yet, even after those modifications, most films' T-55 tanks are in better condition than those found in Russian army warehouses. But there's one Russian tank that, unlike the rest, never seems to make it to the front. Russia boasts about it as the best in the world. Yet, instead of fielding it, they send T-62s and Mosfilm props. This is the infamous T-14 Armata, the supposed pinnacle of Russian engineering. Russian propaganda has imagined it storming Washington and reaching the English Channel. On TV, of course. When it moves, when it fires, when the machine gun starts working. I won't reveal its full arsenal, but it'll be an unpleasant surprise for any enemy troops in its path. In reality, this propaganda darling is little more than a prototype that hasn't lived up to its developer's promise. The number of tanks showcased to the public decreases each year, and that's without any combat participation. Colonel Samalaha, Ukraine's foremost expert on operating all kinds of armored vehicles, has a lot to say about the T-14's fate. Transforming those 12 parade prototypes into real combat units is no longer possible. The same goes for infantry fighting vehicles. There were only 12 parade models and a few experimental units, but their situation is even worse, which is probably why they're rarely mentioned. What can we say? The tank exists, but it's not going to war. Parades are parades, and war is war. Two very different things. The Armata hasn't reached the front lines yet, but this has. Behold, the T-80, fitted with an RBU-6000. This Soviet naval rocket launcher, mounted in a fixed dual-axis system with 12 radial barrels, was designed to destroy submarines and incoming torpedoes. How many Ukrainian submarines Russia has neutralized in the Donbas steppe remains a mystery. Judging by the setup, the T-80's RBU-6000 is manually loaded, with low accuracy and a wide spread. And now, here's a true gem of Russian creativity. This isn't a tank, or an APC, or even a ground turret. It's a Frankenstein creation that's actually fighting in Ukraine, an MTLB equipped with a naval 2M3 gun. This ancient naval cannon is highly maintenance intensive. Equipping MTLBs with these naval gun mounts is an interesting innovation, but these systems require water cooling. So where are the water tanks? With this setup, this so-called wonder weapon can't even penetrate a T-55, let alone modern Ukrainian armored vehicles. And if anyone dares to use it against infantry or pickup trucks, well, this is what happens. With an operational range of just 2.5 miles, this system is more of a target than a functional combat unit. But the Russians didn't stop there. Here's another Frankenstein based on the MTLB. This one features a turret from a BMP-1, armed with a 73mm 2A28 Grom cannon and a 7.62mm PKT machine gun. To enhance protection, they've added a makeshift grille on the turret and steel screens on the sides. Even compared to other MTLB hybrids, this vehicle looks particularly bizarre. However, there's no record of these machines being used in combat against Ukrainian forces in open sources. Analysts like Oryx have not yet documented any confirmed losses of these specific hybrids, though they've noted destroyed variants of other MTLB Frankensteins, such as those equipped with Zu-23-2 autocannons or even the 2M3 guns. And finally, here's a bit of comic relief for those who still think the Russian army is doing fine with its armored vehicles. In the absence of proper logistical solutions, the Russians deployed a bathtub. Yes, you heard that right, a self-propelled bathtub for field operations. Maybe some high-ranking Russian generals made it to the front but couldn't part with their comforts and decided to take a bath. Though we might never know for sure. In conclusion, the state of armored vehicles in the Russian army leaves much to be desired. To make up for their losses, they're using every available piece of equipment that can move. However, they're saving their newest and most expensive machines for last. This vividly illustrates the military political leadership's view of the war's cost. Soldiers' lives are cheaper than equipment. T-62s, T-55s, and other relics may be the butt of many jokes, but even these old machines can still fire and hit something. Of course, Ukrainians are ready to fight against T-55s and even T-34s. But the real question is, are Russians ready to attack on horseback when these relics run out? Share your thoughts in the comments.